Okay, so I think what we find out here is, like I said, that the impact of the Great Depression is going to vary. And I think I find it interesting that when we look at, we're focusing, or who was left out of, at least in this group, this class, in terms of being impacted the most, women and artists was at least not, didn't fit into our frame of thinking as an impacted by it. You can make a really good case for a number of these various groups here in terms of their impact. But in many cases, minorities seem to always be the first ones to be fired, and especially in this case, the Great Depression, for like Latinx being deported in order to free up jobs, for African Americans being fired to free up jobs. Indigenous people is an interesting one in that for many cases, you have a group of individuals who are not necessarily being brought into American society in general. You have reservation systems. It's not until 1924 do indigenous people actually become citizens of the United States. In 1934, there is a law that's passed, the Indian Reorganization Act that's passed, that's going to give them a little bit more autonomy. But here we've got some problems that are plaguing them and are very systemic as well, that's plaguing them. So any of these groups are going to be greatly impacted by the Great Depression. So I appreciate those who have put some thoughts down on it. Thank you for that. And so when we look at the Great Depression, what ultimately is going to end the Great Depression in many places around the world, and especially in the United States, is the bringing on the Second World War. And that is what we're going to focus on today and the rest of the way as we go through this trimester. So 2 weeks on the Second World War. So we're going to look at the causes, the practice, and the effects of the Second World War. And this week we'll get our second and final assessment of this, summative assessment of this trimester. So you're going to want to dial it in when we get to that point as well. But the Second World War, I always have to ask, whether you're at home or here, do we have any GIs in our family, those that have served in the Second World War that you know of? Good. There's a great chance that they are not alive today, but it's possible. Do we know if we have any World War II vets in our family? Yes. Gavin, who?
My great grandpa Bill actually served in World War II. He's like 95 years old, I want to say.
Okay. All right. Do you know what theater? Europe, Pacific?
I don't know exactly, what theater he served for. I just know that he was in the Army, I believe.
Okay. Noelle?
Both my grandpas.
Ah. Do you know which theaters? Pacific, Europe, North Africa? No?
No, I don't.
Okay. But both your grandpas. All right. Okay. Anyone else? What do you get? Your grandpa. Do you know where? Okay. These are just some things that we probably just don't ask and all that stuff. I never really, asked my grandparents a lot of details about the war itself. Of course, recently it prompted, I asked my aunt through my sister, because she's got a better communication with my aunt. Did my grandma Hyder work in one of the war industry plants? But no, she didn't. But my grandfather, he was 35 at the time. Well, let's see, when the war broke out. Oh, scratch that. When the war broke out, he was 30. He was 36 when the war broke out. So he didn't enlist, but he had to register for the draft, and it was in 1945 that he got his draft notice, but he did not get drafted. My other grandfather was already out of the military. He got discharged. He didn't necessarily have a good discharge, I will say that. So he was not going to be accepted into the military at that point. My father did have some cousins that served in the Second World War. My dad would serve in the Air Force during the Korean conflict. So World War II, there's a great chance that you did have someone who participated in the Second World War in some way. All right, so we'll take a look at the Second World War. We'll look at mainly from the lens of the United States, though. So last year, in world history, you probably looked at it from the lens of the more global community here. Naturally, when we look at causes, we do have to bring that in about where the United States fits in contextually to the outbreak of the war. But then as the war is going on, we want to take a look at the lens for us and as well as the Americas here. Now, I got a little video clip here. It's going to give us a little highlight on perhaps what caused the Second World War, and then that will lead us into our activity for today and tomorrow. All right. And we do know hopefully we do know the guy that's on the screen here. Who is it? That dude from Austria. Who might this individual be? He's 5'8". Yep, it's Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, and he was 5'8". So now, why do I know that? You know, when in 12th grade we look at authoritarians, and one of the criteria of authoritarian is look the part. So then, of course, naturally over time, we've all looked up individuals and their heights and stuff like that. Adolf Hitler, he's 5'8". Joseph Stalin, he's only going to be about 5'6". Right? Did we have any tall authoritarians? Of course we did. Fidel Castro, 6'2". So he was a tall guy. All right, but here we go. I got a little video clip on Adolf Hitler, and it's going to give us a little insight here into some causes. All right, so let me mute my mic.
World War I leads to World War II as day follows night. By the end of World War I, everybody is looking to get advantage.
World War I didn't really end in 1918. It brutalized an entire generation of Europeans. It brutalized an entire generation of people around the world. And it made them realize that war on this scale was not only possible, but actually thinkable.
There's a wonderful, wonderful political cartoon where the fat politicians and generals are walking out of Versailles, and there's a little tiny boy, and he's crying in the corner. And I'm not kidding, he says, "I'm cannon fodder for 1940. They knew, anyone with half a brain knew that the Treaty of Versailles was essentially the starting gun for the Second World War.
Essentially what happened is that you create such an unstable economy and so much animosity between nations that you're just seeding the field of war to rise and grow again.
A lot of the anger, animosity, resentment that fuels the rise of the National Socialists of Adolf Hitler in Germany can be directly tied to that. it would be difficult to argue that that's simply propaganda that's utilized by Adolf Hitler. These were very difficult terms for the German people to handle. And it creates this bunker mentality, this us against the world mentality that ultimately will play out in Hitler being able to create a program that appeals to that sentiment.
To the average German, they have been sold out by the politicians.
In particular, it made people like Adolf Hitler, who had fought, after all, in the German army in World War I, think that if only the Germans could do it again, but do it right this time, they could actually win.
We call it World War I, World War II, but it's really two different stages of one global conflict. Just happens that people put their arms down for a 20-year period, and then they went back to fighting again.
All right, does anyone have any takeaways on that? Any takeaways, any thoughts? The last point by that historian about, in a sense that they're really, World War I, World War II are really the same wars, in many ways kind of fits Mr. Moran's thought about these conflicts as well. That we just had a little time period of peace in between them, but in a sense, you know, the world is just going to go at it again here. So World War I was supposed to be a war to end all wars. It does not, by any means. We have a peace organization known as the League of Nations that was to try to keep peace. It did not. We did have a lot of political and social and economic unrest at the end of the First World War. All that is going to contribute to the destabilization that allows for people like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini to rise to power. And so because of all this instability, many nations are looking inward at fixing their own problems and having blinders to what is going on in the world. All right? And during this whole time, what does the United States have done? At the end of the First World War, we go back into our isolationist mold, and we focus more on things at home. If we do focus on stuff abroad, it seems to be more economics in nature, exporting our trade goods and such like that. It's the 1920s. And so, again, we're focusing more on the roar of what is happening at home, but there are some things going on. So what I would like for you to do is let's go to Schoology here. All right, and if you go into there, we see the assignment, neutrality to war activity. So we want to open that up, and it's going to look something like this. Right? And what we want to do here is we're really looking at American reactions to fascist aggressions. All right, and so the fascist powers in this conflict is going to be Germany, going to be Italy, and will also be Japan. All right, there is a fascist element inside the Japanese government. All right, but we also tend to focus a lot on, when we think of Japan, the Emperor Hirohito at the time. The civilian government is going to be greatly influenced by the military, and that's where we could perhaps find some fascist elements. So there are many factors that are going to lead to the war of this caliber, and it's almost very difficult to pinpoint one major cause. In that video, it mentioned nationalism, some ideology, militarism, imperialism is also in there as well. And because of this war involves so many nations, it is a global war. One would say it hit every continent, except maybe Antarctica. It hit every body of water, it seemed like. This is a true global war. This activity is broken into three parts. First part, we're looking at our reaction to fascist aggression. So what you are to do here, and you're going to use chapter, I believe, 34 34 in the book. Yep, 34 in your textbook is going to be a good source here. And I did attach that also to the assignment. So I would really avoid GTS in it, and really look at chapter 34. What you have to do here is in part A, you have a list of American responses to a series of actions by the aggressor nations in pre-World War II years. Write in the name of the response in the appropriate place in the chart below in the column American response. So you're just matching. You're matching here. You're not necessarily explaining, but you are matching. But in order to understand this, you are going to need to get some background context to it. All right, and so you have and it's not in order by any means. It's jumbled list as well. So what you're going to have to do perhaps is in your textbook look at Italy invaded Ethiopia 1935. Read about it, look for the context. All right, and find which one matches up with it. Okay. Here, though, let's see here. We could probably assume, if we look at Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in 1941, you look up here, U.S. declared war on Japan. All right, so there's your freebie, which really wasn't a freebie. You figure that one, you could figure that one out on your own. So I would just write declared war on Japan. Cross it off the list. So use the words, use the phrases that are up there. Then a summary question, of course, is which of the U.S. responses to fascist aggression mark a turning point in moving the nation from neutrality to war? Again, this is where we look at where does it look like the United States is moving away from being out of this conflict, because many of us in the United States had thought what's going on in Europe is European affair and need to stay out. Where on this list looks like the United States is abandoning that? Okay. Naturally, we're going to probably think this, but where on this list perhaps does it look like the United States is really violating its own neutrality and getting involved in the show? In many ways, we'll call it an undeclared war. Where does it look like that? The second part is looking at America First Committee in the Second World War. Now, President Donald Trump, he had this idea of America First. All right, that's not the first time that we've had this idea of America First. In the 1930s, there is a group that's going to be created called the American First Committee. And it's going to have some pretty well-known individuals in there. And future presidents are going to be part of this group as well. And so what we need to find out is, what is it? What is this group? Because this is a very influential group at first, putting a lot of pressure on FDR's administration. But eventually, because of the invasion or the bombing of Pearl Harbor, that's going to change a lot of this. So, but what we first want to find out, and here's your video links, or your hyperlinks are here as well. We want to first find out, what do they believe in? Okay. Then why did Americans oppose U.S. involvement in European affairs? This one might be difficult to view, so you might have to watch it on your phone or from a desktop, whatever it might be. Your iPad might be blocked from your iPad for some reason. Either this one or this one, I can't remember. And why did America First Committee get disbanded? Then you got a couple political cartoons, or here you got a propaganda poster, I should say. What's the message there? And then here we got this one. All right. With this one here, better plug my computer in here before it dies. Who's the artist in this one? Yeah, Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss is the artist. Dr. Seuss gets his start here during the Second World War. And he draws political cartoons, but many of the characters in his cartoons go on to become characters in his books, which I always think is kind of interesting as well. So what kind of message there? And then finally, the last one is your BHQs. Kind of looking at the United States involvement in overseas conflicts. And the first one is looking at, when was it in our best interest to reverse our neutrality? Okay, so by 1941, it looks like we were reversing our neutrality. Why is it our best interest to do that? And then overall, you know, when should we get involved in overseas conflicts? And what is the consequences for acting or not acting in overseas conflicts? Now, we can think of that in contemporary terms. It doesn't have to be necessarily about World War II, but about contemporary terms. Okay? That speaks to foreign policy. Should the United States, big nation as we are, somehow not intervene or intervene? And what's the consequences for doing either one or the other? Right? Something to think about. Okay? This is due tomorrow. So it won't take that long to actually do this. Even though it looks like we've got 3 parts, it doesn't take that long. Okay? Any questions about this assignment? Any questions? Okay, so with that, those at home, you can stay on the Google Meet or exit and have a great day.